Hi and welcome to Cook with Tom. I'm your host, Tom. Today we're going to be making what I would consider to be my mother-in-law's absolute favorite dish, chicken saltimbocca. A mixture of salty cured meats with this delicious pan beurre blanc. It's one of my favorite dishes as well. In fact, I only make this 2 or 3 times a year just because I don't want to spoil myself. You'd be surprised, it's not that hard to make. We're making saltimbocca for 4. So what we'll want to do is start off with 4 lobes, 4 halves of chicken breast. What you want to do is take these and cut off any of this little noduly fat that's going on here. I don't like to eat that when I'm cooking or when I'm eating chicken saltimbocca. In fact, I find that it doesn't really render down that well throughout the process, and so you don't get as delicious. It ends up being more fatty than it does juicy. So I tend to trim off all the exterior fat off of this chicken. But what we're going to do is we're going to make chicken cutlets. You've probably heard that word, you've seen it in the store. Essentially all it is just a thick chicken breast made into 2 thinner chicken breasts. All you do is take a knife, make sure it's very, very sharp. In fact, just to make sure, I'm going to take and sharpen my knife. Now, you've probably seen people doing the fancy schmancy thing. I'm going to have to clean this now. But what I like to do, it's a lot easier if you put your sharpening steel down onto either a cutting board or even onto a towel and go across it holding your knife at a 20-degree angle, doing about 5 strokes per side. And then what you want to do after you've done that, let's set that aside to wash it, is take your knife, fold a towel over, and run it through the towel. That's going to get all the little metal shavings that came off. But now we know we've got a sharp knife. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this piece of chicken and taking our knife, holding it sideways, and making sure our fingers are out of the way of our knife, gently start cutting through. I usually saw 2 or 3 times before I get into the chicken, and then I'll put my finger on the opposite side of the blade because I really don't want to get cut. But then what you do is you'll just cut all the way through the chicken until you've got 2 halves. Easy to do. You'll do that with 4 chicken breasts until you've got 4 really nice cutlets. All right, let's get the heat going on our pan. You've probably noticed I very rarely use nonstick pans. I prefer a clad bottom, either aluminum or copper bottom pan. The reason being is they tend to distribute the heat a lot better. They're much better conductors of heat. Whereas nonstick is actually not that good of a conductor of heat, and usually in nonstick pans you end up with some weird metal on the bottom that just doesn't have the horsepower to transfer heat from the burner up to your food. So for that reason, I really like a nice thick cladding on the bottom of my pan. Typically when you're preheating your pan, if it's not non-stick, if it's just a regular old stainless steel or aluminum or copper, usually you'll have copper or aluminum on the bottom and then stainless steel on top, because stainless steel is not that good of a conductor either, but it really makes for a nice contact with your meat, which we can get into that another time. But when you're preheating this, I'll turn my stove on to about medium high and add some oil, and the way you can tell when your oil is ready, wine drinkers refer to this as got legs, and that's when it'll start to shimmer a little bit, but when you turn it, you'll see it starts to run down, and it runs down in little striations. That's when you know that your oil is up to temperature. So what we're going to do, let me grab a little sage out of the fridge. We'll put some olive oil in the pan, and we'll throw some sage leaves in our oil. Essentially what we're doing here is making a compound oil, flavoring the olive oil with these sage leaves so that as we put our chicken in later on down, it's going to pick up some of that flavor. You don't have to put this in here for very long in order for this olive oil to really pick up the flavor of the sage. In fact, it takes 15, 20, 30 seconds if the heat's right. But then what I like to do is I'll pull these sage leaves out and I'll use them as a garnish in a little bit. So now that we've got the sage out of there and that oil has picked up a lot of those flavors, we'll take about a half cup of all-purpose flour and put into that about a teaspoon of freshly ground black pepper. This is such a great recipe. We'll shake that up a little bit to mix the black pepper in. Oil's smoking a bit, we don't want that. And we'll just dredge it in the flour and knock off any excess flour. Here's the easy part. I've got some ground sage, and I'll take that ground sage and put it right on top of our chicken cutlet. Then we'll take a nice slice of prosciutto, throw that prosciutto on top. So we've got chicken, we've got sage, and we've got prosciutto. And we'll put that face down in the pan. Always keep your, in fact, I'm washing my hands because you can never wash your hands enough when you're working with chicken. You've probably heard of E. coli or salmonella, which is what you get from chicken. Salmonella was E. coli before E. coli was cool. It's something you can never have a kitchen too clean when you're working with chicken. So we've got that in there. You can fill the pan up. Be careful not to crowd your pan. If you put too much in here, instead of giving it this nice fry, what we'll do is we'll end up steaming our chicken, and we don't want that because we want to get a nice crust on the outside of our chicken. So make sure there's a good amount of gap. In fact, if you start to see water coming off your chicken and hitting your pan and staying there, that's a good indication that either one, you don't have enough heat, or two, you've got too much chicken in your pan. So just as you're moving forward, make sure to keep the heat and pan balanced out. The cool thing about chicken, it's got this pink opaque kind of look to it. However, as it cooks and the proteins go from this coil into this long strands, those strands start blocking the light differently, so it changes from pink to white. So that happens around 160 degrees, which is exactly the temperature we need to cook our chicken to. It's kind of convenient that the proteins start to change to the right color at the exact temperature we need to make sure all the bacteria is done. I'm gonna go ahead and flip these, and oh my gosh, it's got this beautiful color on the top. It's turned nice and brown, and oh, this smells so good. I'm going to keep making these. We've got since this is for 4, I've got a total of 8 cutlets. I'm going to go ahead and keep making these. One thing you should do at this point is turn on your oven to 200 degrees, because as these cook all the way through, we need a place to put these to keep them warm while we're making our pan sauce. So all you do is, again, remember, chicken, sage, prosciutto, both sides until it's white, and then stick it in the oven. Some people will tell you the easiest way to tell if chicken's done is to do the test with your hand, and this part of your hand, the fat part by your thumb, is really a pretty good indication that it's done. That's not a bad indication. In fact, I can feel this one right here is about feeling like this. I really personally, especially where the cutlets are this thin, you can look and say, oh, they're still pink. It's so much easier, or you can always use the cut into it method. The method I really prefer, however, is the meat thermometer. Take it and stick it into the thickest part of the meat. Make sure it's at 160. It's safer, you know your meat's done, and it's much more accurate.